What gives the professional trader the ability to execute their trades without error? They are confident, meaning they are no longer encumbered by the same fears that plague the typical trader. Trading without fears is learned mental skills. I've already given you examples of mental skills. Remember what did we say about the ability not to choke? Okay? That would be an example of a mental skill. Learning to trade without fear, hesitation, or internal conflicts is a function of believing that you don't have to know what's going to happen next on a trade-by-trade basis to win or make consistent money. This is the heart of it right here, everyone. Okay? This is the heart of it. And again, we're still in the introduction, believe it or not. Okay? So I'm going to reinforce all this. But eventually, what you're going to do is get to the point where you believe that you do not have to know what is going to happen next on a trade-by-trade basis. This trade, and this particular trade, and this particular trade. You don't have to enter these trades thinking that you know what's going to happen next to win, to make consistent money. And that when you stop believing that, you will start making consistent money. Because it's your expectations about this trade winning that's going to mess you up. Go ahead.
What you're really saying is you have to have a belief in your plan or your methodology, and you're looking for a probabilistic result saying, over a period of time, I will execute 60, 70, 80% of my trades. The one I'm going into now could be a good one, could be a bad one.
That's right.
I don't care.
That's right. Exactly right. Perfect. Thank you. This is where we're going. Okay? Thinking, assuming, or believing you know what will happen next creates an unrealistic expectation in a specific outcome. What's wrong with an unrealistic expectation? Well, think about, let's say, expectations in relationship to the characteristics of humanity. This cuts across everybody and cuts across all cultural lines or barriers. Everyone, well, first of all, before we can get to that point, what is an expectation? An expectation is a mental representation. In other words, a belief, an assumption, or an opinion, or whatever, thinking, assuming, or believing, a mental representation of what the next moment, meaning next moment, next 5 seconds, or the next in 10 seconds, or the next hour, or whatever, is either going to, in the environment. In other words, we have a mental representation, and we have an external environment that expresses itself, okay? So my mental representation, meaning my expectation, if the environment shows up in a way that is consistent with what I believe, then what will my state of mind be? This is a universal characteristic of humanity. This isn't any different with anybody, anywhere. How will I feel? What will be my state of mind? What will be my experience? I'll be in a state of satisfaction, a state of well-being. I could be joyous. I could even end up in a state of euphoria. The degree to which the environment does not express itself in a way that's consistent with the way I think it's either going to look like, sound like, taste like, smell like, or feel like, okay? I will be in a state of dissatisfaction. A state of betrayal, disgust, anger, fear, terror. Your ability to create consistent results as a trader is all about what you expect. When you change your expectations to be consistent with the way the environment, the market environment exists, the fear will go away. When you change your expectations in a way that's consistent with the way the actual market environment exists, your fear will go away. And you'll be able to do exactly what you need to do when you need to do it, without conflict, without hesitation, and be able to close that profit gap between what your methodology will give you and what you end up with in your bottom line. Unrealistic expectations cause us to define and interpret and therefore perceive market information as threatening. Ultimately, we can break the market down to its lowest definable component parts. If we break the market down to its lowest definable component parts, what we end up with is up and down ticks. Okay? An uptick is one incremental price change where the price moved from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, and then down ticks. Okay? When we're operating out of unrealistic expectations, we're going to tap into 4 primary trading fears that will cause all the errors that we make as traders. Those fears are the fear of being wrong, losing money, missing out, and leaving money on the table. And those fears will actually cause us to perceive these up and down ticks as threatening. And what we're going to learn about the nature of fear a little later is that fear will cause us to focus on the object of our fear so that we end up creating the very experience we're trying to avoid. Therefore, if I'm afraid of being wrong, I will actually perceive this information in a way that causes me to be wrong. If I'm afraid of losing, I will perceive these up and down ticks in a way that will actually cause me to lose. If I'm afraid of missing out, I'll actually create the experience of missing out. And if I'm afraid of leaving money on the table, that's exactly what I'll end up doing. Now, when you think about the nature of these up and down ticks and the photons that appear on your computer screens, is there an inherent characteristic in that information that's threatening in any way? In other words, is it information? In other words, when we talk about the nature of emotional pain, which is the threat of pain, okay, the fear, not physical pain, where we have all of us have a normal nervous system, and we come into contact with a physical object, if I hit this with my arm, it's going to hurt. If you hit it with your arm, it's going to hurt. So we've got some universal commonality. But with emotional pain, it's not that way at all. Although we think that it is, it's not. Because emotional pain requires an interpretation. And then interpretation comes from what we believe. You guys with me on this, on the interpretation part? Because, see, the information itself, the up and down ticks, have no charge to them whatsoever. They're not positively or negatively charged. They're just up and down ticks. That, based on your ability to read those up and down ticks, tell you what the potential is for the market to move in any particular direction. If you're perceiving them as threatening in some way, that's definitely going to cause you problems when it comes to creating consistent results. In fact, you're going to find it impossible. Okay, let's talk about some typical trading errors. The typical trading errors the professional has evolved beyond. Don't define the risk in advance of putting on a trade. Why in the world, now, of all the trading books that you've ever read, out of all the workshops you've probably been to, I'm sure that you have been exposed to this particular piece of advice countless times. And yet, it is the primary trading error that people commit all the time. They don't predefine the risk in advance of putting on a trade. If you don't predefine the risk in advance, you're operating out of the mindset that you think you know what's going to happen next. And what I'm going to establish for you when we get into the next section is that is absolutely not the case. It doesn't mean we don't think that, but the reality is it isn't the case. See, because when we predefine our risk, let's put it this way. If I'm a typical trader operating out of the 4 fundamental fears, the fear of being wrong, the fear of missing out, losing money, etc., we got a real problem here because our minds are naturally wired to associate. In other words, our minds will automatically make connections, meaning this, that if I get into a trade and I end up being wrong, I expect it to win and I'm wrong. I have to admit that I'm wrong. it isn't just admitting that I'm wrong on this one trade. Our minds, because the way our minds are wired, it has the potential to tap us into the accumulated negative energy of every time I've been wrong in my life. Okay? So if this circle represents a huge ball of negative energy inside of our mental environment about what it means to be wrong, being wrong on just one trade could tap us into that pain. And it's going to work differently for everybody. Everyone's minds works a little bit differently. But that's the potential. If you wonder why people seem to live and die on the outcome of the next trade, this is one of the reasons why. This is why it's so important. Because it has the potential to tap us into the accumulated negative pain of every time we've been wrong in our lives. Every time we've lost something in our lives. Every time we've missed out on an opportunity that we didn't take advantage of. Every time we've been in an opportunity and didn't get the maximum amount that was available. Those are the 4 fears. So the problem with predefining our risk is this. Is that if I'm afraid of being wrong, and I don't know how to think about trading appropriately in a probabilistic mindset, I'm not going to get into this trade unless I think I'm right. And the problem with predefining the risk is that it requires that I gather evidence as to why it might not work. Predefining your risk requires that you gather evidence as to why it might not work. Well, I wouldn't even be getting into it in the first place if that were the case. So I'm going to gather as much evidence as possible to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. Because if I start gathering evidence as to why it might not work, then I might talk myself out of taking the trade. And then if I end up talking myself out of taking the trade and it turns out to be a winner, I'll probably be in more emotional pain than what I would have been in had I taken the trade and it turned out to be a loser. So I just make sure that I've got all my ducks in a row and I don't take the trade unless I do. And therefore, what I have done, now think about this, what I have essentially done is define the risk out of the trade. I've gone through a mental process in which I have literally defined the risk out of the trade. Why do I have to put a stop in the market and predefine my risk if I know I'm going to win? A professional trader just doesn't think that way. They would not. I'm not saying that they never thought that way. I'm not saying that they didn't experience the exact same thought process that I just took you through. I'm saying they have evolved beyond it. They would never allow themselves to get into a trade without predefining the risk. In other words, what does the market have to look like, sound like, or feel like to tell me this trade isn't working?